Hello, it's Moira here, and this tutorial in the Daisy Sampler series is going to look at Motif 1 in section 2 and is the start of our working in the round. Just a quick recap of the charts. For each section of your chosen version, you get 4 charts. Chart 1 shows all 3 motifs for this section, and if you're experienced at mosaic crochet and have good eyesight, this is a good chart to work from. However, I am aware that to the new mosaic crocheter, this can be so confusing to look at. So therefore, I have split these charts into individual motif charts. Do be aware that the last round on the individual motif charts is always displayed as the first round on the next motifs charts. So for example, round 8 on motif 1 chart is round 8 on motif 2 chart. Make sure you do not work this round twice. We've already worked our slip stitch round, which is round 0. So we are ready now to start looking at motif 1, which is rounds 1 to 8. This is my completed motif 1 on the tapestry version. And the reason we're looking at this version is because I want to show you how we line up our centre sections. We want to ensure that that N that I'm pointing out there lines up very neatly with the N from the body section. And we've got a similar pattern going on at the side as well. We are lining up that sections so that they look evenly at both sides. And we want to line up the bottom U with the bottom U from the body section too. So to enable this to happen smoothly, we're going to look at our chart, and we're going to use round 1 as a counting round, and we're going to use round 2 as an adjustment round. Now don't get too concerned, I'm going to help you all the way. So to help with the counting, I have created some stitch markers. I always create my stitch markers just out of yarn. I've got mustard ones for my centre markers, and I have got light brown ones for my other markers. So I'm now ready to start round 1. We are starting with our colour A, and back to the hook size we worked in the body, which in my case is a size 5mm hook. So I'm starting at the red square on the chart, so I'm counting in from the chain stitch on the slip stitch row, so that's 1, 2, 3, the 4th stitch in from the end. You can see I've inserted my hook into the back loop, we're working back loop only again, of the 4th stitch. I'm joining my colour A yarn with a chain stitch and then working double crochet back loops into the next few stitches. I don't add in my stitch markers until I've actually worked this whole round. I just find it so much easier to do my counting and add my stitch markers in once I've actually done the crocheting. I'm just nearing the corner here, and when we get to the corner we add 2 chains to go around the corner. That's the chain stitch from the slip stitch round, and now I'm going to add 2 chains, 1, 2, and work around the corner. And that's the first stitch around the corner. That's the chain stitch from the slip stitch round, both worked now. Now going down this side, it can be sometimes slightly difficult getting into these stitches from the previous round. Remember, because these were our slip stitches that we worked down our sides into the holes. I'm going to work double crochets into the back loop all the way around the body, and when I get back to that first corner, I will show you how to create an invisible join. I'm just coming to this end of this round. I'm just going to do a quick recap with you of how to create an invisible join. So we thread our needle with our yarn, and then we're going to insert our needle through the pointed part of the V stitch. So underneath that V from the very first double crochet stitch, not the chain stitch. Then insert your needle through the center of the very last stitch you created. Then weave your ends in at the back. We still also have all these ends from our rows that we created in our body section. I deal with these, I weave all these ends in after I've created motif 1. The round 1's now completed, so I can now tick that I've done round 1. I've also done round 0, so I'm ticking that too. And I always mark my corner sections. I just mark them off like that. And now I'm going to do my counting of my stitches, so I get my stitch markers, and my mustard ones are for my center stitches. So I'm going to work out the center stitch in my top here. I have got 5 stitches, so I use my hook to line up with the 3rd stitch and then insert my hook to create my stitch marker there. So using my mustard yarn, I'm going to pull it through and just create a very loose stitch there. So that's my center of my top row. I'm going to do this for each side. So I'm going to do it for the bottom. I've turned to the bottom, line up, find stitch 3 and insert my mustard yarn as my stitch marker at stitch 3. Now I'm going to identify what I want to be the center stitch for each side. And the center of the side is between rows 29 and 30. You just have to work out which stitch you wish to use on round 1. Do this on the other side too, so that you've got 4 coloured stitch markers denoting the center stitch of each side. Now I've added the center stitch markers, I've split my body into 8 sections, so I want to work out the stitch count of each 8th section. I'm going to draw myself a little diagram to keep myself right so I know what my stitch counts are. There you go, I've created the center section there and I've got now 8 sections, and this is for round 1. Before counting our stitches, it's important that we identify what is the top of our work. So I have attached a bright yellow yarn to remind me what is the top of my work. I'm always going to start counting in from the corner edge. So from that first chain stitch on the corner, I'm going to count in groups of 10 and then insert a stitch marker every 10 stitches. So counting how many stitches I have at this 8th, it is 32. So I'm going to write that in my diagram, 32 stitches there. I'm now going to count the other side. And again, as I said before, I count from each corner into the center. So I've got 10, 20, 30, 2 stitches there. I'm going to record that into my diagram. I'm going to go count and put stitch markers into the other 3 sides, and once I've finished that I will record the stitch counts into my diagram. I've counted my stitches and inserted stitch markers all the way around the body. I now am going to count the stitches and insert them into my diagram. And remember, we count the stitches the way that we're going to actually work around our actual body, the way that we work the round. That was 31 at that side, and that is 31 there too. This diagram of stitch counts will help us enormously when we come to do our adjustment round on round 3. Now I've worked out what the stitch counts are for each side, I'm going to go back to the chart and see what the actual stitch should be. So adding up the top gives me 65 stitches. 32 and 32, 64, plus the centre one, 65. And you can see I will add up each side in turn. That's 63. And the bottom is 66. What I'm doing is checking off what they actually should be, which is why I'm ticking them or crossing them. So my top and my two sides are correct and my bottom is wrong. I've drawn a diagram for round 2 and I'm putting 67 in the centre because we want 67 stitches at each side on round 2. So I'm going to insert a chain stitch at each corner. So 2 chains and the one in the centre plus my 2 32s give me 67 stitches. So my top is correct. This side I've added my chains, added my 31 stitches, and that comes to 65 stitches. So I'm 2 stitches short, so I need to add 2 stitches into this side, and I do it evenly. I add 1 at either side of the centre. This is why we've got our centre stitch in, so we can actually add them evenly, our stitches that we need to increase with. Along to the bottom, there's our chains, 33 and 32. That gives us a count of 68 stitches. So we actually are 1 extra stitch. So where it says 33, it should say 32. So we've got to decrease a stitch there. On to our last side, where we had 31 stitches. So we know that we're going to be, if we add those up, that comes to 65 stitches. We're 2 short, so we need to add 1 in at each section there, again 2. So looking at our diagram, the top is correct. The left side, we need to increase 2 stitches, and I'm going to increase them evenly. So I'm going to increase the first stitch at stitch 15. And I'm going to insert the second stitch, again at stitch 15, but number 1 is counted after the centre stitch. So moving along to the bottom row, we need to remove a stitch, decrease a stitch in this first section. So I'm going to decrease at stitch 16. The right hand side is going to be treated the same as the left hand side. We've got 2 stitches to add, so we're going to increase both of those stitches at stitch 15 for the first section and stitch 15 for the second section. Now we have a plan that we can work with on round 2, which is our adjustment round. Counting where I need to join, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm joining my new colour of yarn for round 2 in stitch 5. Again, into the back loop. I'm going to work a chain stitch to fix the yarn. Now we've joined our yarn with a chain stitch, we're ready to carry on working double crochets into the back loop. Looking at my instructions, I can see that my top row is correct. I've no adjustments to be made in my top row. I'm going to discard the stitch markers. I don't need them anymore, they have served their purposes. However, I will keep the mustard stitch marker at the centre. I'm just coming up to the centre stitch, so I'm going to pull the marker out, work a couple of stitches, and then reinsert the marker, because I want to always know where my centre stitch is for the next couple of rows at least anyway. And now with the stitch marker repositioned, I'm going to complete this row just working my double crochets into the back loop. So I've finished that side, and now I can see on the next side I have got an adjustment. I've got an increase of 1 stitch at stitch 15. So working double crochets all the way along until we get to stitch 15. So now I'm at stitch 15, I need to add an extra stitch in. So I need to create an increase. And to create an increase, we just work into the same stitch again. So I've just worked another double crochet into stitch 15. I then continued working double crochets all the way along until I get to the center stitch, and just like before I want to keep that stitch marker for the center stitch, so I'm going to take it out, work my center stitch, and then reinsert the stitch marker. And now my stitch marker is inserted, I can now start counting again 15 stitches, as I have another stitch to increase on this section, and I'm going to insert it again at stitch 15 because stitch 15 is the center of, or as roughly as I can get to the center of the section. Here's stitch 15, and I'm just going to work into the same stitch again, and that has increased my stitch count by an extra 1. Now I've finished this side, I'm actually going to count to make sure I have got 67 stitches, and I'm going to put in stitch markers again every 10 stitches like I did before. Just going to count my stitches: 10, 20, 30, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 47, 57, 67. Now looking at the bottom row, I've got a decrease. I've got an extra stitch, so I need to lose it. So I'm on the bottom row where I've pulled my stitch markers out, but I've left my centre one in. On this first section of the bottom row, I'm going to be decreasing at stitch 16. So again, I'm going to be counting my stitches from that corner till I get to stitch 16. So now at stitch 16, I insert my hook into the stitch as normal, and then I insert my hook into the next stitch too. You see that? I insert my hook into the next stitch as well, and then I work my double crochet as usual, pull through both those stitches and then work as normal. And you can see both stitches are now under one stitch, and that's how you work a decrease. And you complete working double crochets along this row, readjusting my stitch marker at the center as I go. I've just added my stitch markers, and I'm just about to go and check to make sure that I have 67 stitches along this side too. It's always advisable to check your stitch count after you do any increasing or decreasing. Looking ahead now at the last side, we've got an extra stitch to add in both of those sections, just like we did at the other side. I'm just going to pull the stitch markers out because we don't need them to do this stage. We're going to do exactly as we did on the left side and increase our stitch at stitch 15 in the first section and stitch 15 in the second section. So I'm at stitch 15 on my right side, and I am going to work into the same stitch again to give me an extra stitch. And remember, just like we did before, we count from the center along 15 stitches, and we'll increase in the 15th stitch from that center point. And there we go, we're at stitch 15. So we're going to insert twice into stitch 15 and just complete our row with our double crochets as usual. I've completed the right side and I've added my stitch markers, and I'm now just doing my recount to make sure that I've got 67 stitches before I finish off round 2. I'm just going to complete this round by working around the corner and then joining with an invisible join to that first double crochet stitch that I created at the top row. I never actually counted the stitches on this row. Hopefully they are 67, but I am going to count them now, and I'm going to count them before I actually break the yarn, just in case there is an issue. So I had nothing to worry about, there were 67 stitches, and I'm just going to now join with an invisible join onto that first stitch. You're very familiar with these, we've done a few of these already. So joining with the invisible join and then weaving all the ends in. So I'm now confident that each side has got 67 stitches because I've counted them and the stitch markers are in to prove it. However, after putting the stitch markers in, we no longer need them. So apart from the centre one, I'm going to discard all the other stitch markers. I'm also going to keep that yarn marker that tells me which is the top. It's quite useful having that there. Now we're ready to start round 3. So round 3 is where our drop trebles start. And it's because of this drop trebles is why we went to all that hassle in round 2 to make sure that our stitches were the correct amount so that our pattern will work at the corner. We're going to start at stitch 6 in from the corner. And at this 6th stitch, we're going to insert our hook into the back loop and using our yarn A, join with a chain stitch. So once we've joined our colour A with our chain stitch and we look at our pattern, we actually have a drop treble immediately. So we're going to work that drop treble once we've identified where the actual stitch is 2 rows below. There we go, worked out where the front loop is. And then if we look back at our pattern, the pattern is another double crochet and then another drop treble. And we're going to carry on working our double crochet drop treble until we get to the center stitch. And remember, our center stitch has got the stitch holder in it. And when we get to the center stitch, there should be a drop treble at either side of the center stitch. The center stitch itself should be a double crochet. And you should be able to see if that center N, remember that I spoke about way back at the beginning, is lined up with the center N of the body. You're following the pattern of double crochet drop treble till you get close to the corner. As I'm nearing the corner, I'm going to stop and explain a section about the chart that I haven't actually discussed up till now. So there's a set of heavy lines that says repeat these stitches until the corner, and the stitch pattern is quite a simple stitch pattern on this actual round. It's a drop treble, a double crochet, a drop treble, a double crochet, a drop treble, and that's repeated actually until we have 12 stitches. And then we actually use that repeat of 12 stitches until we come close to the corner, until we come across another heavy black line. And then the corner stitches will actually be different. So we've got to be quite careful there. So I've now worked out that that drop treble there is a drop treble where I am. So I now have to work a double crochet, another drop treble, and then so on until the corner. So my next stitch is going to be a double crochet, then a drop treble, then another double crochet, then a drop treble, And what we're going to do here is make sure that our drop treble lines up with our slip stitch row. And then we've got 2 more double crochets before the corner 2 chains. That last double crochet is worked in the corner chain from the previous round. I always turn my pattern and turn my work at the same time. So looking ahead at our pattern, we've got 2 double crochets, then a drop treble, and that drop treble, it again lines up with the slip stitch round. So I'm working those 2 double crochet as per my chart, and then my drop treble, making sure it's lined up with my slip stitch round. So we've got a nice neat corner, and we're now ready to work down the left hand side. Our pattern is the same, a drop treble and double crochet all the way along. However, this is the row that I added 2 extra stitches to at stitch 15 at both sections. So I'm going to keep an eye out for those when I get to that stitch. And there we go, that's stitch 15, which I will keep an eye out for. I'm going to lose all the stitch markers, we don't need them anymore apart from the centre one. So I'm going to work a double crochet and then a drop treble all the way until I get to stitch 14, and then I'm going to look at how we can incorporate stitch 15 neatly. So here's stitch 15. It's actually stitch 15 and 16 because there's 2 stitches in one. So round 2 is the dark grey round. It's got 2 stitches. Round 1, the cream round below it, has only got 1 stitch. What we want to do to make sure that you really don't see this effectively stitch that's missing, we want to make sure that one of those little prongs, one of the legs of that pattern, is actually inserted into the gap. So I'm going to count from the beginning where the prongs, where the legs go. So there's one there, then there's not one, then there's one, then there's not one, then there's one. There's not one in there. So I am going to now create my drop treble into the next stitch as normal. So nothing different here. Next stitch as normal for this drop treble. This is where we're going to actually create a very strange looking stitch. So we've got 2 stitches behind, so we're going to pick up the next stitch which we normally would do as a double crochet. However, there isn't really a corresponding stitch below it. We're going to have to, for our drop treble, go into the next stitch from the drop treble we already created. Can you see that's just the next stitch? So we're going to effectively have created a little V. See how it's a very strange sort of looking stitch. There's not the big gap that there are in the other stitches. However, because we've actually worked out that one of those legs are actually going to sit into that space there, that will open up that gap. And I'm going to do this with all of my increased stitches. I'm going to work out where the legs are going to sit and then make sure that the leg is going to sit into one of those tight stitches, because that's what it is. It's just a tight stitch because we've got an increased stitch on round 2 but not on round 1. And now we're ready to carry on working our pattern until we get to the centre stitch. And our centre stitch is the same at this side as it was at the top. We should have a drop treble at either side of our centre stitch. So our centre stitch itself should be a double crochet. So I'm going to carry on working the pattern, our double crochet, drop treble, until I get to that next increased stitch. I'm at my increase again, so I need to work out where the little leg goes. If we look back to the one we've already created, you can see it does look a little bit of a strange stitch, but we will lose it, I promise you. On round 4 it will be lost. I've worked out that my little leg is going to be going into this space here. So I'm going to pick up my drop treble in the stitch immediately after the stitch that I picked up the previous drop treble in. So both drop trebles are sitting next to each other. Double crochets worked as normal, as is the next drop treble. Even though those stitches are looking tight, I'm very confident that after round 4 you won't even see them once those drop trebles are worked into them. I'm going to continue working the pattern now until I get to the corner. A quick recap of the corner. I've just worked a double crochet. I'm ready to do that first drop treble after that heavy line, and then I've got 1 double crochet and 1 drop treble to do. And remember, that drop treble has to line up with the slip stitch round from round 0. Then I have 2 double crochets and 2 chains for my corner. Looking ahead at this row, bottom row, we've actually got an extra stitch, so we're going to do a little bit of a workaround to hide this stitch as well. So to hide our decrease, we actually have an extra wide gap that's got 2 stitches in it instead of 1. So to ensure that you lose either the extra wide gap from the decrease or the narrow gap from the increase, you need to work out where those drop trebles from round 4 are going to sit. So a quick recap of things you need to remember before finishing this round is that when you get to the centre, there should be drop trebles on either side of the centre. The centre stitch should have a double crochet. And when you get to the corners, your drop trebles should be lining up with the slip stitch round from round 0. I'll see you back at the final corner. So here I am at the final corner, just creating those 2 double crochets, then the 2 chains to go round the corner, another 2 double crochets that are needed to be worked here, and then after the double crochets, remember that drop treble has to line up with the slip stitch round. There we go, we're lining up with the slip stitch round. Then it's 1 more double crochet and the last drop treble, and then an invisible join will actually be worked over that first chain stitch. So I'm just completing the invisible join here over the chain stitch, and then that's round 3 completed. Once round 3 has been completed, you should have a round of little boxes that look similar to this. I'm now ready to go and work round 4. I'm going to use a ruler now because we're actually getting slightly further up the pattern, and especially now because it's sort of a black colour, I'm going to use the ruler to cover up so I can actually see where I'm working. In from the corners, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches. So we're going to start on the 7th stitch. And I'm just going to count in from the corner here to stitch 7. And I can see that stitch 7's there, and I can confirm this because I can actually work out now by my pattern. There we go, that's the side, the corner pattern there. And then you've got the first drop treble and the second drop treble. We're working just before that 3rd drop treble. For round 4, I'm actually starting on one of the sides. I don't always start on the same side. I tend to turn my work 90 degrees for each round so that the invisible join in the weaving's not all at the same section. So I'm going to join my new colour with a chain stitch, and then my pattern's telling me to work 1 double crochet and then 1 drop treble. So look at the chart now. Is my drop treble. I've got 3 double crochets before the next drop treble, and that's the pattern until we get to the corner. 3 double crochets and then a drop treble. I'm just about at the narrow gap that was caused by my increase stitches. Here we go, I'm there, and I'm going to insert, because I already knew it was a drop treble. I'm going to do a few stitches and then I'm going to show you what it looks like, that you really can't see it. When this round's finished, you'll be very hard pushed to even know that there was an increase in that space in there. So I'm going to carry on working all the way around until I get to the corner. I'm just about at the corner, and I'm going to turn my chart 90 degrees. You may have noticed that I've done this a few times. I always do this so that I'm actually crocheting the same direction as my chart. I'm just there at the dark line. You can see that's the last drop treble. Then I've worked 1 double crochet. I've 1 yet to work, and then I'm ready to do 1 more double crochet and then the next drop treble. And I'm now into the corner of my pattern. So I'm going to be very careful how many stitches I count now. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches before the 2 corner chains. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches before the corner chain. So I've got to work the 2 corner chains, which I've already done, and then it's 4 more double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochets before the next drop treble. 3, 4. And I'm just going to keep repeating my pattern, which is going to be 3 double crochets and 1 drop treble. Keep repeating this pattern of 3 double crochets and 1 drop treble until you get to the corner. Make sure when you get to the corner that you refer to the charts to make sure your stitch count is correct. And then when you get back to the beginning, you're going to be joining the first stitch to the last stitch with an invisible join. And that completes round 4. Just needs an invisible join, and then we're ready to look at round 5. So now we're on to round 5. Round 5 is just double crochets. There's no other stitches in it, just double crochets only, which comes as a nice relief after the angst of getting our stitch counts correct. If, like me, you're working the muted version of the sampler, you actually are using the same colour. But if you're doing the bright version, you're changing colours in this round. And for the tapestry version, you use the same colour too. So looking for our start point, we now have the option of counting stitches or motif patterns. So I can see that I've got those 2 drop trebles, and where I'm starting is in the centre of those drop trebles. So that's a really easy place now to know where to start. So I've inserted my hook, and I'm going to join my yarn, which in my case is the same colour, with a chain stitch. And then I'm going to work a double crochet into the back loop all the way round until I come back, remembering to add 2 chains at the corner, and I will join back at the beginning with an invisible join. Now we've completed round 5, it's time to look at round 6. And round 6 has got what might be a new stitch to some people. It's got a V inserted into it, and the V is a double treble into the front loop 3 rows below. Working a double treble over the 3 rows creates a long stitch. Looking towards my red line where I should be starting, it's actually on the space where my double treble stitch is going to be inserted. Because I can't start there, I'm going to move my hook 2 stitches to the right above the drop treble stitch. So I'm moving 2 stitches to the right above that drop treble stitch. Now I'm going to join my colour A yarn as usual with a chain stitch. So I've got 1 double crochet to work after the chain stitch before I have to work that double treble stitch. And remember, I work in UK terms, so double treble is treble stitch in the US. So as I'm working a double treble, I'm wrapping the yarn twice around my hook, then identifying where the stitch is, 3 rows down. Remember, 1, 2, 3 rows down. It's quite easy because in my case it's the cream stitch, and I'm picking up the front loop as I usually do, and then continuing to work that double treble. And so our pattern is 3 double crochets and 1 drop double treble. We're going to have quite a lot of drop double trebles as the sampler progresses, so that's how you'll hear me referring to the double treble crochet into the front loop from now on. Continue working this pattern until you get to the corner. Nearing the corner, so I'm going to stop and find out exactly where I am on my chart. I'm counting that I've got 2 drop trebles left there, so I've worked out that that centre part there is where my last drop double treble was, so I've got 2 more drop double trebles to do. So 3 double crochets before that last drop double treble before the dark line. So once I've worked that drop double treble, I'm now into the corner section. And the corner section has got 3 double crochets and 1 drop double treble. And working that drop double treble, I'm nearing the corner. There we go. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochets before I get to the corner. 3, 4. I can then work my 2 chain to get round the corner. And now I'm round the corner, I'm going to use my ruler again, and I counted that I've got 4 double crochets to do. After the double crochets, I can see that I've got 1 drop double treble to do before the dark line. And remember, the dark line indicates that we're at the end of the corner section. We then continue with our pattern of 3 double crochets and 1 drop double treble. Now, after I've done the first section of this pattern, I always like to stop and have a look at my corner just to check that my corner looks the same as it should on the chart. So continue following the charts of 3 double crochets and 1 drop double treble, and making sure that you pay a close attention when you come to the corners to get your stitch counts correct. And at the end of the round, work an invisible join. So now I've completed round 6, I just need to identify where I'm starting on round 7. And round 7 is going to be started directly above that drop double treble. It's the second one in from the corner. As usual, I join my new yarn with a chain stitch, and then I've 1 double crochet to work before the first drop treble. And then the pattern is 3 double crochets, 1 drop treble. It's very simple. We've actually worked this pattern before. So 3 double crochets, 1 drop treble, all the way until we get to the corner. Now I'm at the corner, I'm just identifying where I am. I'm on that last drop treble just after the heavy black line. So I now have got 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochets to do before another drop treble. So that's 4 double crochets that I'm working, 3, 4, and then that very last drop treble. And you can see that that drop treble lines up with the corner edge of round 4. Then 2 last double crochets before the corner 2 chains. And once I've completed the 2 corner chains, I'm going to turn my chart and also turn my work as usual. 2 more double crochets and then another drop treble. After we've completed that drop treble, it's 4 double crochets before the next drop treble. We then have completed this corner section. I'm just going to work 3 double crochets before I stop and see what my corner section looks like. So my corner section is looking like my pattern. I've got that little right angle shape and the little square going on. So now I'm going to continue with my pattern of 3 double crochets and 1 drop treble all the way around, making sure that I pay close attention when I come to the corners, and at the end of the round I finish with an invisible join. Round 7 is now complete. We need to have a look at round 8. Working out where to insert my hook, it's above that drop double treble crochet. And I'm joining my new yarn as usual with a chain stitch, and then I've got immediately after that I've got a drop treble stitch. The pattern for this round is the same as the pattern for round 3, which is 1 double crochet stitch, 1 drop treble stitch all the way to the corner. Now I'm back at the corner, just identifying where I am at the corner. So I've just completed that drop treble. I now need to work 2 double crochets before another drop treble. And once that final drop treble is completed, it's going to be 4 stitches to the corner. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, 4 double crochet stitches to the corner. And once I've completed those 4 double crochet stitches, I'm ready to do my 2 chains to get round the corner. And once round the corner, it's 4 double crochets and 1 more drop treble. And then we have another 2 double crochets, which completes the end of the corner section. And now we're back onto the pattern that we followed on the last side. 1 drop treble, 1 double crochet. And we just continue with our 1 drop treble, 1 double crochet until the round is complete. As always, paying particular attention to the corners, and there we go, particular attention to the corners, and when we get back to the very end, we actually join with an invisible join. And now round 8 is complete. We actually have finished motif 1 on section 2. And before I actually start on motif 2 of section 2, I'm going to weave in all the ends from my body. It's time now to get rid of those. Once you've completed weaving in the end, what I always do is give the yarn quite a good tug, because by doing that I then pull the yarn down a little bit and it minimises that slight ridge that we actually have through our double crochet ends. You see that there's a little bit of a ridge there, and by pulling those woven ends down tightly, I'm minimising the ridge. We're now at the end of this tutorial for Motif 1 Section 2, so please do subscribe to Daisyknots channel if you found this tutorial useful. Thank you for watching.